Okay, so I'll be talking on exploring the use of drones in conservation. And I'd just really like to acknowledge all my co-authors on this paper, Norbert, Katz, Frick, Sonia, Matthew, Michael, and a whole lot of other people in the background. This was just an investigation research that we did, and I couldn't have done it without the help of all of these people that assisted in the project. So we went out, KZN Wildlife has tasked me to investigate the use of drones. We want to know if it's a technology that we can use for our conservation monitoring, and we're specifically not looking at security issues here, the rhino anti-poaching, that's in a different league. This is for conservation monitoring. How can we do it better, faster, cheaper? So I partnered with all these wonderful people. We tried out a whole lot of different drones, and I'll just show you some of the results that we found from our conservation monitoring. So the first thing we looked at was water management areas. This is in Reenan Nature Reserve near Escort, and this was a nature reserve that has had a lot of overgrazing historically. It was a farm that was expropriated, I think in the 1940s. It was completely overgrazed. I think it had like 3,000 goats. And it's a very interesting study in rehabilitation. So they've put in all these water management features, and the reserve management needs to go and map these and monitor and make sure that they're still intact. So the image on the left is the best freely available satellite imagery that you can get currently. It's spot imagery. It's 1.5 meters resolution, which is really good for satellite imagery. But as you can see, it's not very good for monitoring water features. The imagery is on the right. It's in Albury. The drone's actually just outside the theatre. We worked with IQ Laser, the Albury drone, and we're getting resolutions of 1 centimeters. We can now zoom into that little red block, and that's what we can see. So we can really monitor the features. It's an erosion control measure across the stream, and you can see the detail. So you can see different trees, so you can identify different plant species. You could map alien plants. So really, really great imagery. We then flew over. This is a failed water erosion feature. We can inform management, hey, your dam's broken, go and fix it before the next rains come. We then did bird collisions with power lines because we didn't want to harm any animals in this research. We used my jersey as a proxy for a vulture. So it's currently the greenback Jersey vulture. We put that down on the ground underneath the power line. We then flew the whole length of that power line and got the imagery together. And then I manually worked through that imagery, and yes, I could find my greenback vulture. Unfortunately, it died because it collided with the power line. But one needs to be careful. You do get magnetic interference with power lines, but there are going to be some more talks on that later in the session. Then another problem that Reenan is having is that with these super extreme events like super droughts, they have noticed a strong cohort of acacias or Vachelia species coming through in the landscape, and this is problematic because it's reducing the amount of grazing for animals, and it's also not good for the tourist experience because they're now seeing bush, not grassland, so they can't see the animals anymore. So they've done an experiment where they've used different herbicides, and they've sprayed a whole lot of these small acacia trees. They're probably about 1 meter in height. And we flew over those sprayed areas. So in the image on the left, that's standard red, green, blue imagery, or the colors as we see them. And all those little gray dots are the trees that have been sprayed and that have died. So immediately you get a very good understanding of the success of your spraying. You can then also, the camera sensor that we used was a multispectral camera, so it had near infrared, which then allows you to do the NDVIs, and you can have these false color composites, and you can see that the darker the red, the more actively photosynthesizing the plant is, and you can see all those little yellow dots in the image on the right, they're taking strain. So we can conclude that currently, or to date, that project is quite successful. Using the same imagery, you can do other things like testing for large tree mortality. So with these droughts that we're having, we're losing a lot of the big trees. You would be able to monitor that. Alien plant mapping, species identification. Then we did another very exciting project where we looked at Cape vulture nests. They nest on cliffs, and it's really, really difficult to count the number of vultures nesting on this near vertical cliff. So the traditional way that you do it is you walk as close to the cliff base as you can. So you're standing right down there at the bottom. You use your binoculars or your spotting scope and you try and scan these cliffs and see vultures that are the exact same color as the cliff sitting in a pothole, and when they sit still you're not sure if they're a rock or a bird. So what the drone allows you to do is to get much closer to that cliff face. You can fly along, so it's now a horizontal view onto the cliff instead of an oblique view onto the cliff, and this actually comes from the Orobi vulture hide. And they sent the drone up, and you can see all those little red circles are the vulture nests that they could photograph in the imagery. And now you can zoom in and you can see why it's so difficult to spot those birds. And the results from that was that since 2001 they've done the traditional monitoring, and in that period they had an average of between 17 to 58 nests using the standard visual methods. In 2017 they tried it out with drones and they found 94 active nests. Now that is not an increase in the number of birds. That is a pure increase in a better technology to be able to count species that is in a very difficult environment. So I'd like to thank Orobi Vulture Hide for their data there. Then back in Weenan, we did some burn scar mapping, very useful for your reserve managers. And this, as I said, was in Weenan, and it was previously ploughed fields. So those funny lines that you're seeing on the landscape are all the contour lines of historical agricultural fields. So you can see the huge impact that agriculture, even though it's now a conservation area, it still has a huge impact on the environment. And you can see that you've got a totally heterogeneous burn across that landscape, and this is very useful for your managers to understand that. Depending on the software you're using, you can use all the cloud points to come up and create a digital elevation model. So the standard SRTM imagery we use, that's got a 30-meter resolution. This is right down in the 2-3 centimeter range. Over that whole image, it has a 30-meter altitude differential, and you can't quite pick it up in the lighting in this room, but if you were to look on the computer screen, you can actually pick out the contour lines, the change in altitude of the contour banks in this imagery. So this is a total altitudinal range of 30 meters, and you can see the wetlands, you can see the dams, you can see the contour features. We then tried it for counting games. We flew transects. The game counts for a general game census were not very successful. It still needs a lot of work, and whilst it can be done, you can fly that transect, you can download the imagery, you can work through the imagery, you can find the animals. And in this case, sunlight is very helpful. The shadow actually helps you to identify your species. It takes a long time. So I don't think the current mechanism of using drones is useful for game counts, but it does really help. I think when we have algorithms that can do object identification for you, and there are companies who are developing this. So I think with time, drones are going to be able to help us count game as well. Then this is just an example. This is work that NASA's doing, and it's in the marine environment called fluid lensing. So for all of you in the marine environment, you know that you've got waves and you've got reflectance off of the surface of the waves. So what NASA has done, and it's Ved Chirath who's done this work, amazing algorithms he's got, he uses the waves as a lens to magnify what you can see under the water. So I can't tell you, there's the reference to the paper of exactly how it works, but the left-hand image is satellite imagery, really good imagery. It's Pleiades, it's half-meter resolution, so fantastic satellite imagery. But then he flew his drone at 23 meters, got between 0.5 and 3 centimeter resolution, applied his fluid lensing, and now you can identify things like parrotfish, sea cucumbers, coral generator, and sharks. So it's really useful in the marine environment. One thing we need to do as KZN Wildlife is to understand disturbance distances on animals. And so it's only preliminary work, but it differs from species to species. And we flew over giraffe, cow and calf, and she ran with that baby at 85 meters. She was having none of this drone. It's like, don't come near me. We flew over a pair of rhinos, and they were pretty chilled. It's like 60 meters. It's like, oh, okay, there's something there. Not a big problem. Obviously, when you're flying your drones to count vulture nests. You don't want to disturb them off of the nest. So we're going to have to do a lot more work to understand disturbance impacts. And then bird of prey interactions. You can lose your drone. So actually, this is quite serious, and there's literature showing that drones have been taken by birds, and it's actually used in the security industry overseas for your VIPs and your celebrities, where the paparazzi now are sending their cameras up with drone over the fence. Oh, like I can take pictures. The security personnel are now using birds of prey to take out the drones. So in summary, drones offer an exciting and useful new tool to add to our conservation toolbox. It's well suited to fine-scale projects and in difficult or dangerous places to go. And we're not excluding the aeroplanes. So think of it as a hierarchical scale. Drones are fine for little areas, then your normal manned aircraft, and then your satellite imageries. They're all tools in our toolbox. It works well in cloudy conditions. Satellite imagery doesn't work well in cloudy conditions. Drones work really well because you're flying underneath the clouds, but not so good in windy conditions. You lose your drone. It gives you very detailed mapping capabilities, but you land up with large file sizes. Your image processing times can be quite long, but I think that will improve as the technology improves. And then the fact that you can put different sensors on that drone and get different data out is just fantastic. It's a rapidly evolving technology, and the software algorithms that will support drone interpretation and image interpretation will improve. And then with that, we as an industry are going to have to develop new assessment techniques. If we use distance sampling, there's no longer a distance factor associated with that, so we're going to have to modify techniques. And it's not without its mishaps. This was Norbert up the tree retrieving the drone when it landed in the tree, not next to us. Camera failures can occur. And then flight times and battery life, that's quite limiting on your quadcopters at the moment. It's maximum on average about 20 minutes. So you can't really fly very far. Your fixed wing aircraft, and you need a different license if you're flying a fixed wing or a drone, quadcopter. So that's currently limiting, but again, I think that won't be a problem in the future. Okay, so it's really great, but what's the catch? Legislation. The Civil Aviation Authority. I'll give a very brief overview. Matt's going to talk to us later in the session. His talk has changed a bit, and he's going to focus more on the legislative aspects related to flying drones. But the bottom line is aviation safety is key, and that's why there are all of these regulations that we have. So in general, for anyone, you're not allowed to fly above 400 feet. You've got to be well away from aerodromes and manned aircrafts. You can't fly in restricted or prohibited airspace, and then sensitive features like police stations, nuclear power stations, 50 meters from roads, buildings, people. But that's not all. So we're getting a lot of applications from students to do research in our protected areas using drones, and I need to be able to advise them what they have to do. So hot off the press from the Civil Aviation in writing yesterday. There's two sets of legislation you need to be aware of. One is NEMPA. So you have to get permission from the protected area. By law, you're not allowed to fly in a protected area. You need to get permission before you can do that. And then in terms of the Civil Aviation Authority, students in this case would be considered private operators. So they would have a restricted visual line of sight, and you can only use the baby drones, class 1 or B. And you've got to maintain line of sight, so 500 meters. That's as far as you can send your drone away. And there must be no commercial outcome, interest, or gain if you fall into the private category. And obviously you need the property owner's permission, and you have to adhere to any other legislation that might be. Please refer to Section 101 of the Civil Aviation Regulations. Don't take my word for it. Okay, what does it mean for KZN Wildlife? So in addition to the above, because we are now an organization, a lot of our ecologists want to use drones in their reserves, but we fall into a new category. We would be a non-profit operation, so we would be classified as non-profit, and we have to have something called an ROC, that's the RPAS, the Remotely Piloted Aircraft System Operator Certificate. Bluntly put, you basically run an airline. and it costs you quite a lot of money to be able to get registered. You need an RLA, a letter of approval. You need remote pilot's license for each person that's going to be flying the drone. You need a certificate of registration. You need insurance and third-party liability. Onerous. It would probably cost us to just do 3 pilots with small little drones like the Phantom DJI in the region of 120 to 140,000 rand to do that, and there's currently an approximately 2-year waiting period with the ROC, with the Civil Aviation Authority. So it's not something we're going to do easily. But they are going to be reviewing the legislation, and they're then going to base it on a risk profile. So if you're a film company and you're flying in the center of Cape Town between buildings with lots of people, you're a high risk profile, and your ROC would be listed as that. If we're KZN Wildlife and we're flying in remote areas, in the bush, away from people, buildings, that kind of stuff, we would have a much lower risk profile. So we're waiting to see what the new regulations are, and hopefully they'll be less onerous. So what's the future? This is really a transformative technology, and it's here to stay. It's not going to go away. And I believe the technology will really only get better, and it's going to become an indispensable tool for conservation and many other industries, not just the conservation sector. And the current estimate is that drones could generate 2 billion rand per annum for the country's GDP, so it's not insignificant. And there's just been such a huge demand that the civil aviation has been completely swamped by the huge demand for drones. And the legislation has lagged behind this demand and the technological developments. But hopefully, with engagement from various sectors, the legislation will evolve to meet the requirements of the various industries. So I'd just like to, again, acknowledge all the people that have been involved in this project. Thank you very much for your time and help. Thank you very much.